Suzanne Morphew was born on April 11, 1971, in Indiana, a state known for its beautiful farmland and small-town charm. She grew up in a close-knit family with two brothers. From a young age, Suzanne had an open, caring heart. She was always the kind of person to reach out to others, making sure they were okay, and lending a helping hand wherever she could. Her family remembers her as a bright student who excelled in school, not just academically, but in sports and extracurricular activities as well. Suzanne was known for her competitive spirit and her determination to succeed, but it was her kindness and compassion that left a lasting impact on those who knew her. In high school, Suzanne met Barry Morphew. Barry was athletic, charming, and an aspiring baseball player, and he soon became a part of Suzanne's life. They began dating, and as time went on, their bond grew stronger. Barry, however, was on the fast track to a career in professional sports, and Suzanne was equally determined to make her mark in the world of education. They were the perfect couple, Barry, the star athlete, and Suzanne, the brilliant and compassionate student. Together, they seemed to have it all. After high school, Suzanne and Barry's paths diverged for a while. Barry's dreams of becoming a professional baseball player seemed within reach when he was recruited by the Toronto Blue Jays, but a serious injury ended his career before it even started. Barry found himself at a crossroads, unsure of what to do next. Around the same time, Suzanne was beginning her studies at Purdue University, where she pursued a degree in education. While she was focused on her studies, she and Barry stayed in touch, and their relationship grew stronger. It wasn't long before they made the decision to get married. They tied the knot in a small ceremony, surrounded by close friends and family. It seemed like the beginning of a perfect life. Barry went on to work in landscaping, a career he carved out for himself after giving up his dream of professional baseball. Suzanne found her calling as a teacher, and the couple settled into a comfortable life in Indiana. Soon, they had two daughters, Mallory and Macy. As a family, they enjoyed outings, weekend trips, and the simple joys of life. However, even in this picture-perfect family, not everything was as ideal as it seemed on the surface. In 2018, Suzanne and Barry decided to leave behind the busy life they had built in Indiana and start anew in Colorado. The couple had always dreamed of living in the mountains, surrounded by nature. They found a beautiful property in Salida, Colorado, a small town nestled in the heart of the Rocky Mountains. The house was spacious, with incredible views of the surrounding landscape. It seemed like the perfect place for a fresh start. Suzanne, especially, seemed excited about the move. She was ready to leave behind the pressures of her former life and embrace the peace and quiet that the mountains offered. Suzanne retired from teaching to focus on her family and to explore new hobbies, including mountain biking and hiking. But living in Colorado wasn't as simple as Suzanne had imagined. The pressures of a new life, combined with the isolation of living in a remote area, started to take a toll on her mental health. Although Suzanne was an optimistic person by nature, she often struggled with feelings of loneliness and uncertainty. She was away from her friends, her extended family, and even the support system she had once relied on. This feeling of isolation only grew as time passed. As time went on, Suzanne's marriage to Barry began to show signs of strain. Suzanne loved Barry, but their relationship wasn't as perfect as it appeared from the outside. There were arguments, misunderstandings, and a sense that they were drifting apart. One of the main issues was their communication. Barry worked long hours landscaping, often traveling for work, while Suzanne was left to care for the girls and manage the household. Suzanne had always been an independent woman, but she felt that Barry was becoming distant. There was a growing sense that they were not truly connecting in the way they once had. Suzanne began to feel trapped in a life she had never fully envisioned. Barry, for his part, seemed consumed with his work. He didn't always understand Suzanne's need for companionship or emotional connection. His long absences only added to her loneliness. Suzanne began to seek solace in other places, including her church and her passion for fitness, but nothing seemed to fill the emotional void that was growing in her life. In 2019, Suzanne met a man named Jeff Libler, a former high school classmate. Their paths crossed online, and they soon rekindled their friendship. Suzanne was drawn to Jeff in a way that she hadn't been drawn to anyone in a long time. They began talking regularly, exchanging texts, and even meeting up when Barry wasn't around. It wasn't long before their friendship turned into a full-blown affair. Suzanne confided in Jeff about the struggles she was facing in her marriage, and he offered her the emotional support she had been missing. Their relationship seemed to give Suzanne a sense of validation that she had long been lacking. They would talk for hours about life, love, and the future. For Suzanne, the affair became an escape from the growing tension in her marriage. However, this affair would soon become one of the key pieces in the mystery surrounding Suzanne's disappearance. Suzanne's affair was kept a secret, but not for long. Barry had his suspicions. He noticed that Suzanne was acting differently, distant, distracted, and more emotional than usual. One night, he confronted her about her behavior. Suzanne, feeling the weight of the situation, admitted that she had been talking to someone else, but she reassured Barry that it was nothing serious. Barry was hurt, but he tried to push the issue aside. He didn't want to believe that his marriage was falling apart, but deep down, he knew something wasn't right. Suzanne's emotional distance was growing, and so was her need for independence. The more she pulled away, the more Barry tried to hold on. But he didn't know that Suzanne had already started to make plans for a new future, one that didn't involve him. As Suzanne settled into her new life in Colorado, she was facing more challenges than anyone could see. Her marriage to Barry was rocky, her affair with Jeff offered a temporary escape, and her mental health was deteriorating. Suzanne loved her family, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she had lost her sense of self somewhere along the way. Little did anyone know, Suzanne's internal struggle would soon lead to one of the most tragic and puzzling disappearances in recent memory. What seemed like a new beginning for the Morphew family was about to turn into a nightmare. On the morning of May 10, 2020, Suzanne Morphew woke up early, just like she always did. It was a Sunday, and the weather was perfect: clear skies and warm temperatures, typical for a spring day in Colorado. The sun shone through the windows of their home in Salida, and the smell of fresh mountain air filled the house. Suzanne had a simple plan for the day. She loved spending time outdoors, and with the stunning Rocky Mountains in her backyard, it was easy for her to find peace in nature. Suzanne had always been a fitness enthusiast, and she often went for bike rides or hikes in the hills surrounding her home. On that particular morning, Suzanne decided to go for a bike ride. It was her favorite way to clear her mind and enjoy the beauty of the Colorado landscape. Before heading out, Suzanne made sure everything was in order. She made her husband, Barry, his coffee, and gave him a quick goodbye kiss. Suzanne wasn't the kind of person to make a big fuss about leaving, she preferred to keep things low-key. Barry had a landscaping job to attend to that day, so he would be out of the house for much of the day. Suzanne's daughters, Mallory and Macy, were not home either. Mallory was attending college in another state, and Macy was staying with a friend. So, it seemed like just another ordinary day in the Morphew household. As Suzanne got ready to leave, she told Barry that she would be back before lunch. Barry didn't think much of it at the time. It was just like any other day when Suzanne went off on her bike, enjoying some solitude in the mountains. Suzanne set off on her bike at around 9 a.m., taking the familiar route up Chaffee County Road 225, a rural road that wound its way through the foothills. She was known to be a skilled cyclist, and the road was one of her favorite spots to ride. It wasn't too steep, and the views were breathtaking. But as the hours passed, Suzanne didn't return home. Barry tried calling her, but there was no answer. At first, he thought she might have just gotten caught up in her ride or maybe was taking a longer route than usual. Suzanne was independent and often enjoyed spending time on her own. But as the afternoon wore on and Suzanne still didn't come home, Barry began to feel a sense of unease. It wasn't like Suzanne to be gone for so long without any contact. By 4:30 p.m., Barry made the decision to call 911. At 5 p.m., the search for Suzanne Morphew officially began. The local sheriff's office in Chaffee County was notified that Suzanne was missing, and they immediately began mobilizing resources to locate her. They had no idea what had happened, but they were determined to find answers. The search started with a focus on the area around Suzanne's usual biking route. Search and rescue teams, along with volunteers, combed the terrain, looking for any sign of Suzanne. The weather had been good, and there were no obvious dangers in the area. Suzanne had been an experienced biker, so it was hard to imagine that something as simple as an accident could have kept her from returning home. As night fell, the search continued into the evening. Barry stayed at home, pacing, waiting for any news. He had been in contact with the search teams, but there was still no sign of Suzanne. At around 10 p.m., the sheriff's office issued a statement saying that they were focusing their efforts on finding her as quickly as possible. The hours stretched on, and still, there was no word. Early the next morning, search teams found a crucial piece of evidence. Suzanne's bike was discovered along a stretch of Chaffee County Road 225, about 10 miles from their home. It was not where Suzanne usually parked her bike, and it was clear that something wasn't right. The bike was leaning against a tree, and it appeared as though Suzanne had been riding when something happened. There were no signs of a crash or any obvious injuries. The bike was in good condition, and there were no tracks or trails that suggested she had fallen off or been involved in a serious accident. The discovery of the bike was puzzling. It didn't seem like an accident. It was as if Suzanne had just vanished. With the bike found and no sign of Suzanne, the investigation into her disappearance began in earnest. The sheriff's office, along with the FBI, launched a full investigation. They questioned Barry about Suzanne's whereabouts and tried to determine what had happened on that fateful morning. Barry was adamant that he had no idea what had happened. He had been working that day and hadn't seen or heard from Suzanne since she left the house. He explained that they had a solid relationship, and there were no indications that anything was wrong. Barry cooperated fully with the investigation, but authorities still felt that they needed to dig deeper. The authorities began to review Suzanne's phone records and digital footprint. They found that Suzanne had been in contact with someone the day before her disappearance, her affair partner, Jeff Libler. Suzanne had been messaging Jeff in the days leading up to May 10, but there was no indication of anything unusual in their conversations. However, the discovery of Suzanne's affair raised suspicions. Some wondered if there could have been a confrontation between Suzanne and Barry, or if Suzanne had decided to run away. The situation became even more complex when it was revealed that Suzanne had been in contact with her family members, telling them that she felt trapped in her marriage and was contemplating a big change in her life. With the focus turning to Barry, the authorities began to examine his role in Suzanne's disappearance. As the hours passed, it became clear that Barry's behavior was starting to seem more and more suspicious. The authorities asked Barry for his whereabouts on the morning of May 10, and he told them that he had been working at a landscaping job in Broomfield, Colorado, which was several hours away from Salida. Barry's alibi seemed solid at first, but as the investigation continued, there were questions about his behavior after Suzanne's disappearance. He had been quick to suggest that Suzanne had run away, but some experts believed that Barry might have been trying to downplay the seriousness of the situation. The investigation into Suzanne's disappearance continued for weeks, with little progress. The sheriff's office followed up on every lead, but there were no new developments. The search for Suzanne expanded into neighboring counties, and volunteer groups continued to search the wilderness for any signs of her. The case drew national attention, with many people wondering what had happened to Suzanne Morphew. Was she a victim of foul play, or had she truly disappeared voluntarily? The mystery deepened with each passing day, and Suzanne's family and friends continued to hold out hope that she would be found. As weeks passed, the search for Suzanne Morphew turned from a missing person case to something more complicated. What started as a routine search in the Colorado mountains soon became a national mystery. Suzanne had disappeared without a trace, and the more the authorities looked into the situation, the more they began to suspect that foul play might have been involved. The Chaffee County Sheriff's Office, along with the FBI, began digging deeper into Suzanne's life. They had already questioned Barry extensively, but now they needed to look at every possible angle. Suzanne's disappearance was not just about a missing person anymore, it had become a case of potential murder, and they were determined to uncover the truth. In early June, the sheriff's office started searching different areas, including places further away from Suzanne's usual biking routes. They believed Suzanne may have been taken to another location. The investigation grew more intense as authorities began to bring in experts to help them search for any trace of Suzanne. As the investigation continued, authorities began to focus even more on Barry Morphew. His behavior had been strange from the beginning, and now, with more time passing, the suspicions only grew. Barry's interviews with investigators were inconsistent, and some of his actions after Suzanne's disappearance seemed to point toward guilt. For example, Barry had told the police that he had been in Broomfield, Colorado, at the time Suzanne disappeared, working on a landscaping job. This alibi was difficult to verify, and many people began to question how Barry could have been so far away from home, yet still appear calm and unbothered when speaking about his wife's disappearance. Additionally, Barry had been very vocal in the media, even before Suzanne's body was found. He made public pleas for her to come home, but to many, his tone seemed off. It didn't seem like a grieving husband, but more like a man trying to maintain an image of innocence. The investigation into Barry's background revealed some unsettling details. Authorities discovered that Barry had been having an affair with a woman named Michelle. While this wasn't a crime, it added to the suspicion that there was more to the story than just a missing person case. The discovery of the affair raised questions about whether Suzanne's marriage had been in trouble, which may have led to an explosive situation. In late August 2020, a breakthrough finally came in the case. A body was discovered near Moffett, Colorado, about 50 miles from Salida. The discovery was made in a remote area, hidden among dense trees. The remains were quickly identified as Suzanne Morphew. At first, authorities did not release many details about how or why Suzanne had died. All they could confirm was that her body had been found in a difficult-to-reach area, a place that would have been nearly impossible to get to by accident. Barry Morphew was arrested shortly after the body was found. The investigation into Suzanne's death had taken months, but the authorities were now ready to make an arrest. They believed that Barry was responsible for his wife's death, but the evidence was still not clear enough to bring formal charges. Barry was charged with first-degree murder and the case was about to take a new turn. In the weeks that followed, the investigation into Suzanne's death revealed some chilling details. Investigators began to uncover more about the moments leading up to Suzanne's disappearance. They learned that Suzanne had been in touch with her family and friends in the days before her disappearance. She had been telling them that her marriage with Barry was falling apart. One of the key pieces of evidence came from Suzanne's phone. In the days leading up to May 10, Suzanne had been in contact with several people, including her affair partner, Jeff Libler. Suzanne had expressed to him that she was unhappy in her marriage and was considering leaving Barry. Investigators were unsure how much Suzanne's affair played into her disappearance, but it certainly added another layer to the mystery. In addition to her phone records, authorities discovered surveillance footage that showed Barry's truck leaving their home on the morning of May 10, the day Suzanne went missing. This footage was crucial, as it put Barry much closer to the area where Suzanne had gone missing than he had initially claimed. Authorities also found a series of emails between Barry and a friend, which hinted at his anger toward Suzanne and their marriage. Some of these messages contained threatening language, which made investigators believe that Suzanne's death might not have been a result of a simple accident or a disappearance gone wrong. On May 5, 2021, Barry Morphew was formally arrested and charged with first-degree murder, along with other charges related to the disappearance and death of Suzanne. The arrest sent shockwaves through the community of Salida, where many people had believed Barry's earlier pleas for Suzanne's safe return. In the months that followed, Barry's legal team worked to mount a defense, but the evidence against him was mounting. Authorities had uncovered more evidence linking him to Suzanne's death, including forensic evidence, cell phone records, and financial records that painted a picture of a troubled marriage and a man who may have gone to great lengths to cover up his crime. Barry's trial was scheduled for 2022, but the case continued to make headlines as new details came to light. For many, the case became a symbol of how domestic troubles and hidden secrets can lead to tragic and deadly outcomes. As the investigation unfolded and details about Suzanne's life came to light, it became clear that her family and friends had been deeply affected by her disappearance and death. Suzanne's two daughters, Mallory and Macy, struggled with the loss of their mother and the horrific circumstances surrounding her death. Mallory, who had been attending college at the time of her mother's disappearance, spoke publicly about the heartache she felt. She described her mother as someone who was loving, kind, and always put others first. Mallory and her sister Macy had been left with many unanswered questions, and they struggled with the idea that their father might have been involved in their mother's death. Suzanne's sisters, who had been close to her, also struggled with grief and anger. They remembered Suzanne as someone full of life, and the thought that someone in her own family could have taken her life was incomprehensible. The investigation into Suzanne Morphew's disappearance and death had become a case with national attention. Suzanne's body had been discovered, and the authorities had charged her husband, Barry, with first-degree murder. The evidence against Barry was piling up, but the case was far from over. For Suzanne's family, there was no peace. They were still struggling to come to terms with the loss of a loved one and the shocking possibility that someone close to her was responsible. The emotional toll on her family was immense, and it seemed like the investigation would drag on for many more months, with more twists and turns yet to come. The arrest of Barry Morphew brought the case into the spotlight, and the legal process began to unfold. The trial, scheduled for 2022, would be a critical moment, not just for the Morphew family, but for the community and the entire country. It was a high-profile case that attracted attention from news outlets, true crime enthusiasts, and the general public. Suzanne's death had left so many questions, and now Barry would stand trial for his role in her disappearance and death. As the legal proceedings began, many people in the community and beyond were eager to see how the justice system would handle such a complicated case. Barry Morphew was not only facing charges for first-degree murder but also charges for tampering with evidence and attempting to influence witnesses. The prosecution's case was built on the mounting evidence gathered in the months following Suzanne's disappearance. For Suzanne's family, the trial was both a painful and a necessary step toward justice. It was their chance to finally learn what happened to their beloved daughter and sister, and to hold someone accountable for the loss that had shattered their lives. The prosecution laid out their case carefully, focusing on the most compelling evidence against Barry Morphew. Key points in their argument included: 1. Barry's inconsistent statements. The prosecution pointed out that Barry had given conflicting accounts of his actions on the day Suzanne disappeared. His statements to investigators were not always clear, and there were significant discrepancies in the timeline he had provided. 2. Barry's motive. The prosecution argued that Barry had a clear motive for murder. His affair with Michelle, the financial struggles the family faced, and the rocky state of his marriage to Suzanne all pointed to a possible motive for Barry to end Suzanne's life. 3. Forensic evidence. The prosecution presented forensic evidence from Suzanne's body, which suggested that she had been killed before being left in the remote area where she was discovered. They also presented forensic evidence linking Barry to the crime scene, including cell phone data and DNA traces. For the discovery of Suzanne's body, the prosecution used the discovery of Suzanne's body in Moffat, Colorado, as a key piece of evidence. They claimed that Barry had deliberately placed her body in the area to mislead authorities and to make it appear as though she had been a victim of an accident or something else. 5. Barry's behavior after Suzanne's disappearance. The prosecution emphasized Barry's behavior after Suzanne's disappearance. His media interviews, his calm demeanor, and his insistence on looking for Suzanne himself were all seen as signs that he might have been trying to manipulate the public and law enforcement into believing he was innocent. The prosecution's case relied on a combination of direct evidence, circumstantial evidence, and a detailed examination of Barry's actions and relationships leading up to Suzanne's death. In contrast, the defense team worked hard to discredit the prosecution's evidence and to portray Barry as an innocent man who had been wrongly accused of a crime he didn't commit. The defense had several strategies to counter the prosecution's arguments. 1. Lack of direct evidence. The defense argued that there was no direct evidence proving that Barry had killed Suzanne. There was no murder weapon found, no witnesses who had seen Barry harm Suzanne, and no conclusive forensic evidence that linked him directly to the crime. 2. Barry's innocence. The defense emphasized that Barry had always cooperated with authorities and that there was no reason to believe he was guilty. They claimed that Barry had been a devoted husband and father and that any actions he took after Suzanne's disappearance were simply those of a man trying to find his wife. 3. The affair was not a motive. The defense argued that Barry's affair with Michelle was irrelevant to the case. They suggested that many marriages go through difficult periods, and that Suzanne had been aware of the affair. The defense claimed that this did not necessarily give Barry a motive to kill Suzanne. 4. Lack of clear timeline. The defense pointed out that there were discrepancies in the prosecution's timeline. They claimed that it was possible Suzanne had left of her own volition, or that something else had happened that didn't involve Barry at all. 5. Barry's emotional state. The defense painted Barry as a man who had been deeply affected by Suzanne's disappearance. They claimed that his behavior, being calm in interviews, continuing to search for his wife, was consistent with someone who was grieving, not guilty of a crime. The defense's strategy was to cast doubt on the prosecution's case and to suggest that there was insufficient evidence to convict Barry beyond a reasonable doubt. Throughout the trial, Suzanne's family was present in the courtroom, sitting through the difficult proceedings. Suzanne's 2 daughters, Mallory and Macy, were especially affected by the case. They had already lost their mother, and now they had to confront the possibility that their father had played a role in that loss. Both daughters were determined to seek justice for their mother, but they struggled emotionally as they heard details about their parents' troubled marriage and Barry's possible role in Suzanne's death. It was clear that the trial was taking a heavy toll on them, as they had to relieve the pain of losing their mother while grappling with the heartbreaking idea that their father might be responsible. Suzanne's sisters, as well, were present in the courtroom, offering support to the daughters and making sure that Suzanne's voice was heard. They knew that their sister had been a loving and caring person, and they felt that Barry's actions had stolen her future from all of them. In a deeply emotional moment, Suzanne's sister described her as a person who had always put family first, and that the loss of Suzanne was not only a personal tragedy but a loss for the entire family. They hoped that through the trial, they could find the truth and bring justice to Suzanne's memory. As the trial continued, both the prosecution and the defense presented their final arguments. The jury listened carefully to both sides, knowing that this case could determine the fate of Barry Morphew. The tension in the courtroom was palpable, as everyone waited for the jury to make their decision. The prosecution had presented a strong case, with forensic evidence, witness testimonies, and a detailed timeline of events. The defense, however, had raised significant doubts, arguing that there was no direct evidence proving Barry's guilt. The defense's portrayal of Barry as an innocent man trying to cope with the disappearance of his wife had also influenced some in the courtroom. Finally, after many weeks of testimony, the jury began their deliberations. They faced a difficult decision: was there enough evidence to convict Barry Morphew of first-degree murder, or was he an innocent man caught in a tragic situation? The trial of Barry Morphew was far from simple, and the deliberations continued for days. The jury was tasked with sorting through a mountain of evidence, analyzing the details of the case, and coming to a fair and just conclusion. Finally, after much deliberation, the jury reached their verdict. In the end, the decision was not straightforward. The jury struggled to agree on whether the prosecution had proven their case beyond a reasonable doubt. In some ways, the case remained clouded by uncertainty. Barry's defense had raised significant doubts, and some jurors questioned the reliability of the evidence. After a long deliberation, the jury reached a verdict, but it was one that was not final. The legal drama surrounding Barry Morphew's case was far from over, and there was still much to be determined in the coming months. After the trial of Barry Morphew ended, the public and the families were left to deal with the aftermath. The media coverage of the trial was intense, with journalists analyzing every twist and turn in the case. Suzanne's family, particularly her daughters, Mallory and Macy, found themselves in the spotlight. Their lives, already devastated by the loss of their mother, were now subjected to even more public scrutiny. For Suzanne's daughters, the trial had been a painful experience. They had sat through weeks of emotional testimony, hearing about the details of their mother's life, marriage, and the circumstances surrounding her death. The hope that they would find clarity about what had happened to Suzanne seemed to diminish as the trial dragged on. Despite the verdict, Mallory and Macy had lingering doubts. They had never wanted to believe that their father could be responsible for their mother's death, but the trial had shaken their perception of him. Barry had been their rock for so long, but now they were unsure of what to believe. The emotional turmoil they experienced during the trial had been overwhelming, and it wasn't over for them yet. In the months following the trial, Barry Morphew maintained his innocence. He continued to claim that he had nothing to do with Suzanne's disappearance or death. Barry's legal team had fought tirelessly to protect him, and he remained convinced that the prosecution had failed to prove their case. But despite his confidence, many people around him began to question his story. Barry's supporters believed he had been unfairly targeted by the legal system, but others saw his continued insistence on his innocence as a sign that he was hiding something. Many in the public, particularly those who had followed the case closely, felt that the evidence against him had been strong, and they could not shake the feeling that there was more to the story. Throughout the aftermath, Barry continued to live in the small Colorado town where he had once had a family, but his reputation was forever tarnished. He was no longer seen as a respected member of the community but as a man connected to a tragedy that no one could forget. Even after the trial had ended, the case continued to capture the public's attention. True crime enthusiasts and armchair detectives were still trying to make sense of the case, discussing the evidence, the trial, and the possible outcomes. The case had become a sort of puzzle for people to solve, with countless theories about what really happened to Suzanne Morphew. Some believed that Barry was guilty but had somehow managed to escape justice. Others thought that the case was more complicated than it seemed and that there was a chance that someone else had been involved. Theories ranged from Barry's affair with Michelle being a potential motive to suggestions that there were other people who might have played a role in Suzanne's death. The public's obsession with the case reflected the ongoing uncertainty and lack of closure. It wasn't just a story of a missing person anymore, it had evolved into a symbol of the flaws in the justice system and the struggles that families face when trying to get answers. Despite the trial, many important questions remained unanswered. Was Barry truly guilty of murder, or had he been wrongfully accused? If Barry didn't kill Suzanne, who did? What led to Suzanne's tragic death, and why had she been left in such a remote location? For Suzanne's family, the need for answers was still urgent. They had gone through so much pain and heartache, and yet they were no closer to understanding what happened to her. Mallory and Macy had hoped the trial would provide some clarity, but the verdict had left them with more questions than ever before. In the years that followed, Suzanne's family would continue to seek the truth. They would not give up on finding justice for Suzanne, and they would not rest until they understood the full story of what had happened to her. In the aftermath of the trial, law enforcement agencies continued to review the case. The investigation into Suzanne's disappearance and death had been a long and difficult process, and there were still many aspects of the case that had not been fully explored. Some believed that new evidence could still be uncovered, whether through advancements in forensic technology or by re-interviewing witnesses. The case was not officially closed, and the possibility remained that additional information could emerge, leading to further investigations and perhaps a different outcome in the future. Several true crime podcasts and investigative documentaries began to explore the case in more depth, re-examining the evidence, speaking to experts, and interviewing people who had been involved in the case. These media outlets kept the story alive in the public eye, ensuring that it wasn't forgotten. For Suzanne's family, the ongoing investigation was bittersweet. On one hand, they were grateful for the continued attention to the case, but on the other, it served as a painful reminder that they had not yet found peace. The search for closure was perhaps the most difficult part of the aftermath. Suzanne's family had lost so much. They had lost a mother, a sister, a daughter, and a friend. They had lost a person who meant everything to them, and yet the mystery of her death remained unsolved. For Mallory and Macy, the loss of their mother was compounded by the trauma of having their father put on trial. Their relationship with Barry had been forever changed, and they now had to navigate the complicated emotions that came with the possibility that their father had been involved in Suzanne's death. As time passed, Suzanne's family realized that closure might never fully come. There might never be a single moment when they could say they understood what happened to Suzanne and why. Instead, they would have to find a way to live with the uncertainty and continue to honor Suzanne's memory, no matter how difficult it was. They decided to focus on the good memories of Suzanne, remembering her as the kind, loving, and passionate person she had been. They also vowed to continue the fight for justice, whether that meant seeking new evidence or finding ways to support other families who had gone through similar experiences. Suzanne's death and the events surrounding it left an indelible mark on her family, the community, and the nation. While the case had not reached a clear resolution, Suzanne's legacy lived on in the lives she had touched. She had been a mother, a sister, a daughter, and a friend, and the love and support she had shown to others remained in their hearts. For the public, Suzanne Morphew became a symbol of the need for justice in cases of missing persons and unsolved crimes. Her story served as a reminder of the importance of fighting for truth, no matter how long it took or how difficult the journey was. In the years to come, Suzanne's story would continue to inspire people to never give up in the search for answers. Her case would remain one of the most talked about unsolved mysteries, and the questions about what happened to her would continue to echo in the hearts of those who had followed her story from the beginning. In the years after the trial, the pain of losing Suzanne Morphew did not fade. Her family, especially her daughters, remained committed to seeking justice, no matter the cost. They knew that the road ahead would be long and filled with obstacles, but they refused to let the case be forgotten. They wanted to uncover the truth, even if it meant challenging the system or facing more heartbreak. Mallory and Macy had seen their lives turn upside down after their mother's disappearance, and they refused to accept that they might never have the full picture of what happened to her. With the trial behind them, they turned their attention toward finding new avenues to explore. They reached out to private investigators and legal experts to review the case again. They were determined to uncover the truth, to bring closure to their mother's story, and to honor her memory by ensuring that justice was served. As the years passed, the case continued to be discussed in various forums. True crime podcasts, investigative documentaries, and even social media platforms kept Suzanne's story alive. People from all over the world weighed in, discussing potential theories, offering new perspectives, and sometimes providing tips and ideas that could lead to new breakthroughs. The advancements in forensic science and technology played a crucial role in keeping hope alive. Over the years, new methods of analyzing old evidence had given investigators a chance to look at the case from a different angle. In the age of DNA testing, surveillance footage, and data mining, there was always the possibility that new evidence could come to light, revealing answers that had once been elusive. For Mallory and Macy, the idea that something could break the case wide open was a comforting thought. They held on to the belief that technology could be the key to uncovering what had truly happened to their mother. Every new development in forensic science, from improvements in DNA analysis to advancements in digital forensics, gave them a renewed sense of determination. They knew the search for the truth could take years, but they were prepared to fight for it. New discoveries in forensic technology also meant that law enforcement agencies around the country were able to re-examine cold cases, including Suzanne's. As new tools emerged, investigators were able to revisit old evidence, reanalyze crime scenes, and test theories that had previously been overlooked. Though the case had not been solved, the hope was that these advancements would eventually bring the answers Suzanne's family had been waiting for. As Mallory and Macy continued their search for answers, they found solace in the support of the community. Suzanne's disappearance and death had affected not only her family but also the people who had known her in the town of Salida, Colorado. Many people who had once been close to Suzanne rallied behind her family, offering emotional support and speaking out in favor of finding justice. The small community where Suzanne had lived became an unlikely source of strength for her daughters. The residents, who had once seen Barry and Suzanne as a well-known couple, now found themselves grappling with the mystery of Suzanne's death. Some believed that the case had been mishandled, while others still held on to the idea that the truth would eventually come out. Over time, local organizations, advocacy groups, and even former law enforcement officers began to offer their support. They helped Mallory and Macy raise awareness about Suzanne's case, assisted with funding private investigations, and provided them with resources to continue their search for the truth. The sense of solidarity that grew around them gave them the strength to push forward despite the challenges. As the years went by, new leads occasionally surfaced. Some came from individuals who claimed to have seen something unusual on the day of Suzanne's disappearance. Others came from people who had heard rumors or had knowledge of events that were never reported to the police. These new pieces of information, while sometimes vague or inconsistent, kept the case alive and presented new directions for investigators to explore. One key lead came from an anonymous tipster who claimed to have seen a vehicle similar to Barry's near a remote area where Suzanne's body was eventually found. While the tip wasn't conclusive, it reignited the debate over Barry's possible involvement. Some believed it was evidence of his guilt, while others thought it might be a coincidence. Regardless, the tip forced law enforcement and private investigators to revisit areas they had previously ruled out. In addition to tips from the public, the case also attracted the attention of professional investigative journalists. They pored over the details, looking for inconsistencies, connections, or clues that might have been overlooked. Their work often uncovered new angles and raised questions that had not been addressed during the original investigation. For Suzanne's family, these investigations were both frustrating and hopeful. They hoped that someone, somewhere, had the key that would finally unlock the mystery. For Suzanne's family, the pursuit of justice was not without its emotional toll. Mallory and Macy had to balance their personal lives with their ongoing commitment to uncovering the truth. There were moments when they felt as though they were reliving the trauma of losing their mother all over again. The pain of the past lingered, especially during significant anniversaries or when new developments in the case arose. At the same time, they were also working to heal. They realized that while justice for Suzanne was important, they needed to take care of themselves and each other. They leaned on each other for support, helping each other through difficult days. The bond they shared as sisters was unbreakable, and together they found strength in the face of uncertainty. As part of their healing journey, Mallory and Macy also began to speak out publicly about their experiences. They used their platform to raise awareness about missing persons and unsolved cases. They knew that there were other families going through similar struggles, and they wanted to give a voice to those who felt unheard. By sharing their story, they hoped to help others who were also searching for answers. Barry Morphew's life after the trial was a complicated and lonely one. While he maintained his innocence, the public's perception of him had been forever changed. Many people believed he had been involved in Suzanne's death, and even though he was acquitted, the stigma lingered. Barry struggled to regain his place in the community, and he found it difficult to reconnect with old friends and acquaintances. Some speculated that Barry had become isolated, retreating from the public eye after the trial. His once quiet life in Salida was now overshadowed by suspicion and doubt. While he tried to move on, the unresolved nature of the case continued to haunt him. There were moments when he looked back on the events that had unfolded, wondering if things might have gone differently. Though he was legally free, Barry's emotional freedom was limited. The weight of the case still loomed over him, and his relationship with his daughters remained strained. Mallory and Macy, though still hoping for the best, found it difficult to forgive him. They were caught in a complex web of emotions: love, anger, sadness, and uncertainty, and they weren't sure how to move forward. Despite the challenges and the many unanswered questions, Suzanne's family remained committed to seeking the truth. For them, there was no closure without knowing what truly happened to Suzanne. They knew that the path ahead would be difficult and uncertain, but they were determined to keep fighting. Each new lead, each new clue, brought them one step closer to finding the answers they had been searching for. The case of Suzanne Morphew was not just about a missing person, it was about the pursuit of justice, the importance of truth, and the need for closure. For Mallory and Macy, the journey would continue, as long as there was a possibility that the truth could be revealed. The tragic case of Suzanne Morphew is not just about the loss of a loved one or the search for a missing person. It is a story that carries with it many important lessons for all of us. From the investigation process to the emotional journey of Suzanne's family, there are key takeaways that highlight the complexity of criminal cases and the resilience of those involved. One of the biggest lessons from Suzanne's case is the power of persistence. Despite the many challenges and setbacks her family faced, they never gave up on finding the truth. Mallory and Macy's unwavering commitment to their mother's memory and their determination to uncover what happened is something that stands as an example for everyone. In life, we often encounter obstacles that seem insurmountable, and sometimes it may feel like there is no hope. But Suzanne's story teaches us that persistence can lead to breakthroughs, even when the road is long and uncertain. Whether in the pursuit of justice, personal goals, or overcoming difficulties, it is important to keep moving forward and never lose sight of the truth. Another lesson from this case is the importance of community support. Throughout the investigation, Suzanne's family received encouragement from both their local community and people across the world who were moved by her story. This support was crucial in helping them remain strong during times of doubt and frustration. In times of crisis, it is vital to have a network of friends, family, and even strangers who stand beside you. The power of a supportive community can make all the difference in the world when facing challenges, whether it's dealing with a personal loss, tackling a difficult situation, or simply seeking justice. Suzanne's case also highlights the importance of using the most advanced tools and technologies in criminal investigations. With every passing year, new forensic methods and technologies emerge that can help solve old cases. The hope is that in the future, cases like Suzanne's can be solved more quickly, ensuring that those responsible for crimes are held accountable. It's crucial that law enforcement and investigators continue to innovate and adapt to these changes. Improved technology, such as DNA analysis, digital forensics, and other emerging tools, can make a huge difference in solving cases that might otherwise remain unsolved. The media played an important role in keeping Suzanne's case in the public eye. True crime podcasts, news outlets, and social media allowed the story to reach a global audience, keeping the pressure on investigators and giving Suzanne's family a platform to share their grief and their fight for justice. This case demonstrates the power of media to raise awareness about important issues, especially when the truth is at stake. While the media can sometimes sensationalize stories, it also serves as a tool for justice. By keeping the spotlight on cases like Suzanne's, we can help ensure that important issues are not forgotten and that the pursuit of truth continues. Finally, one of the most profound lessons from this case is the journey of healing and forgiveness. For Suzanne's family, the emotional toll has been immense. Yet, despite the pain and trauma, they continue to move forward, seeking justice not only for Suzanne but also for themselves. They understand that healing is a slow and personal process, and each person must find their own way to cope with the loss. The story reminds us of the importance of allowing ourselves to grieve, but also of the need to heal over time. It's important to take care of our mental and emotional well-being, seek support when necessary, and understand that healing is not a race, it is a journey. The case of Suzanne Morphew is more than just a true crime story, it is a reminder of the challenges that families face in the pursuit of justice, and the lessons we can learn about persistence, community, technology, and healing. It also highlights the need for continued efforts to find the truth, no matter how long it takes. If you've been touched by Suzanne's story, I encourage you to like this video and share it with others. By spreading the word, we can continue to keep Suzanne's memory alive and support the search for justice. If you know anything about this case, or any other cold case, please reach out to the authorities. Sometimes a single tip can make all the difference. Remember, justice is not just about solving a case, it's about bringing peace to those left behind and ensuring that no one is forgotten. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel for more true crime stories that shed light on the pursuit of justice. Your support helps keep these important conversations going.